In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. You know, last week we had Sister Anastasia come from Belarus, and she spoke to the community, and talking with her, and much of the time that I spent with her, I remember her saying to me, she said, "Father, before I came to your church, I went on Google and I took the little dangly guy." For those who know what I'm talking about, that little guy on the maps that shakes his leg when you grab him and you drop him on the street and he gives you a street view. Am I the only one that knows this? Now I look silly going dangly feet. On the internet, which is there's this map thing. I'll explain it because I didn't get too many head nods. As you pull up an address on the map, it also gives you options. You can have a satellite view, you can have a map view, you can have a combination, you can see the street names. But there's this little man, it's a little character in the bottom, and if you click on him and you lift him up, his feet jiggle. And then you drop him on a street, and it gives you the view of the street. And you can move this little man up and down the street, and it's like you are walking up and down the street. So Sister Anastasia says, I grabbed the guy with the little jiggle legs, and I put him in front of your church, and I walked up and down Fifth Avenue to see what the neighborhood looked like. And as I was thinking of that, I was thinking about today and why we have icons in the church. And we think about many people will ask us, well, isn't that worshiping an icon or worshiping an idol, a graven image? What does the Bible say about that? Isn't that something that's inappropriate according to the Ten Commandments? And as I was thinking of her walking up and down the street, she didn't mention that until we drove down the street, and she says, this is what I saw. This is the neighborhood I saw, and I saw the farm down the street with the horses, and if you haven't gone that way, there's some horses on the street. And she said, now I understand clearly. And as I was thinking of it, as she visited online and as she went on the internet and saw these images, she got an idea, a taste of what the area looked like, but she did not fully experience the area. She hadn't been here until she was here. And for any of those who have gone on the internet, I think one of the fun things to do is, if you've ever gone on Google Earth or anything, and you can type in the pyramids, and you can, 20 seconds you're at the pyramids, and then you can type in something else and go all over the world within seconds. And you can get an insight, a little window into what that looks like, but you're not quite there. And when we look at icons, many of the writers of icons will say, or the theologians who write about icons say they are a window into eternity, a window into heaven, where we can see the model and we can see the image, but we don't get the essence. Now, I think that's an important thing, and we'll learn more about that on the Sunday of St. Gregory of Palamas, where he talks about essence and energies of God, where we experience the energies of God, but we will never know or understand or come to participate in knowing the essence of God. But when we look at the image and the essence, they're two different things. I don't think there's anyone at home that would have a picture of a family, group of family, or even a vacation that would say, this, if you look at this is my vacation. This is the essence of my vacation. This is, you will feel the sun, you will feel the water, you will experience, no, you get an idea of the image, but you don't get the fullness of the essence of what it is. So where does God say that we should have these images? Now, when we look at what a graven image is, and I think maybe some of you have even had this debate with people that you know, they say, well, you have icons, you worship the icons, you venerate the icons. Well, the word venerate is a little bit different than what people see as worship. When we worship something, we worship. We pray to it. We understand that as being the essence of our worship. An icon is not the essence of our worship. We venerate an icon because the icon, again, is that image that we align ourselves with and that we come to understand God's grace in a deeper way, but we also come to understand that this image is something that helps us focus. It's a tool. And when you venerate in the church, we venerate many things in the church. We venerate the priest's hand. It doesn't mean we worship the priest, but we venerate the hand. We show this reverent respect. So when somebody says, will you kiss the icons? What is it? A reverent respect. We have reverent respect for many things. Even a Bible. If somebody were to give us a Bible, you might even venerate the Bible as a reverent respect. Even in the context of the baptism, where the godparent has their hand reverenced by the parents as they receive the child back. It's not that they worship the godparents. It's not that they have some strange graven image of the godparents. It's a sign of reverent respect for that role. And if we look at Eusebius, who was an early Christian scholar, historian, and he was around the 4th century, he writes about the woman who had the hemorrhage of blood. And in front of her house, 4 centuries later, in front of her house was a bronze statue. And in that bronze statue was this woman kneeling, and she's reaching up to a figure who is depicted as Christ, and Christ is reaching down to her. He has his hand, and he has his garments over him. But it's in front of her house from the 4th century. But some might say, well, that image might not be from the command of God. It could be something that someone created and made. And where does it say about the graven images? But now I want to take you to the book of Exodus, which is in the Old Testament. It's one of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And in Exodus chapter 25, it speaks about the Ark of the Covenant. Now, for those who have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know what it looks like. For those of you who haven't, it was a box, and inside were all the holy articles, the manna from heaven that came down, the 10 Commandments, all those things were placed inside, the staff. Everything was placed inside, and it was a box, and on the top it was adorned with gold, and it had these poles, and people would carry it and place it inside their temple. So, how did they know how to build this thing? I mean, that's the question. How did they know how to build a tabernacle? How did they know how to build the temple in those days? And the answer to that question is God himself told them how to do it. Now, this is from the voice of God. And it says, thus you shall make the ark of the testimony from incorruptible wood, 2.5 cubits in length. This is very detailed. And it says a cubit and a half in its width, a cubit and a half in its height. You shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and out you shall overlay it, and you shall make it on a wreath of gold all around. You shall cast 4 golden rings for it, and put them on its 4 corners, 2 rings on one side and 2 rings on the other. You shall make poles of incorruptible wood, and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, that the ark might be carried by them, just kind of like the kavuklion that we have. The poles shall remain fixed in the rings of the ark. Then you shall put into the ark the testimonies which I will give you. You shall also make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2.5 cubits in its length, and a cubit and a half in its width. Then you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. Of hammered work you shall make them, 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end and the other cherub at the other end. Thus we have the first commanded image that God has said to make. So this is an important thing. It might sound the cubits and the gold, but you have, from the voice of God, the command to make an image of the cherubs. In other words, depict the angels on this ark. Now, when we go into chapter 26, it talks about the tabernacle. Now you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine woven linen. The tabernacle is like the kind of the altar area. And scarlet fabric. You shall weave them with artistic designs of the cherubim. Again, you shall weave them with artistic designs of the cherubim. So now we have this three-dimensional cherub that God is said to put on the ark, and now we have a woven, a stitched, an embroidered cherubim that he said put on the curtains. So we see that the image is not that of a graven image that we would worship as God, but it's an image to help us understand where we're at and what's going on. In the early days of the church, some of the earliest images that were around were of St. Peter and Paul, hand-drawn pictures. And Eusebius, also that historian that I'd mentioned earlier, also had seen those with his own eyes. And he says, I've seen these things with my own eyes, these images that people wrote, that they drew. Why did they draw them? Well, if you can't read, a picture tells 1,000 words, right? Isn't that what they say? And nowadays with cameras, we tell all our pictures with cameras, because every story that you may have encountered in recent days starts with, I was somewhere the other day and I saw, and hold on a second, and they pull it up on their phone, they show you a picture of it, right? It's always the accompanied digital rendition to accompany the story. Likewise, the stories that we learn are in the icons. And we have the icons as a sign of telling us those stories beyond words, but not that we worship like we see here, St. Nilos right here. He has two mountains behind him. We don't look at that and say, those are the actual mountains. And those are the mountains that St. Nilos was on, and his myrrh was flowing down the mountains. And if you touch it, you can feel the actual mountain. That's not it. It's the image that reminds us and takes us, and through God's grace, gives us this tool for focus. Just like we have pictures on our phones, on our walls, and reminders of places that we've been to. And the miraculous thing in all of this is that God uses these icons many times as sources of little portals of grace. As we've seen, and as many of you came to the icon of the myrrh streaming icon of Hawaii, the Viron icon, or that you've seen the curse root icon, or that you've seen many other icons, maybe even the icon in Cicero that for many years was weeping, and now the icon in St. John in Homer Glen that is flowing myrrh. These are miracles and signs of God's grace through these extraordinary tools and these extraordinary images that bring us the image and focus towards God. Now just think, and I've heard this over and over. Many people have said when we did all the put up all the icons in the church, they said, looking at some of the older pictures, it looks so bare and it looks so plain. And now they're looking at us. They're staring at us. They're there. It's like they're looking through their icons at us. And if you think of some of the churches that you may have visited, maybe of other denominations, and you walk in and it's stark inside, there's nothing on the walls, it becomes very difficult sometimes to identify that you might be inside a church. You might see the cross up front, which will kind of guide you and make you understand that this place is dedicated to worship. But the walls of the church speak the theology of the church. They speak it through this unwritten yet very visual context that we can understand. And if you look at the ancient Egyptians and what they had done with their writings on the walls inside many of their caves and areas, was their history depicted in pictures. And we too have not only the history of the church, but also the theology of the church speaking to us in icons. So when someone says to you, how do you explain the images that you worship? First of all, we don't worship them, we venerate them. We show reverent respect to these images, but they are not the likeness of God. They are in the image of the saints, but when we come to understand the essence of what the saints are, not what they were, but what they are in the kingdom of heaven, we don't look at the icons and say, this is it, I have the saint in my pocket. We have this reminder and this tool to help us focus in prayer, and in many times those reminders and those icons that you brought today to church, to walk around the church and to hold up and proclaim, that those are the windows in which the saints will look at us and the windows in which we look at the saints. So remember that and keep this definition with you so that when someone tests you and tries to make you doubt and pushes your buttons, if you want to say that, about what you believe and what you do for the icons and how you approach the icons, don't let it get to you. Understand that Exodus is where it started, where God said, make these angels, show the angels in the church. And we have gone on to do that in our faith as well. Now, we don't have statues as in the West, because the Byzantine tradition that we come from, the Byzantine Empire was more focused on art and pictorial art and mosaics and iconography and the painted art, and not so much as in the West, which was three-dimensional sculptures. Now you might say, well, why don't we have sculptures? If it's not bad, why don't we have it? It's because we don't depict the worldly sense of the person. We depict the spiritual. And when you look at the icons and you see, St. Athanasius is a classic example. You see his forehead and you see those bumps on his forehead. In statues, you see the beautiful statues that are depicted from the person, the way they look. But the icons many times are exaggerated with longer fingers, accentuated foreheads, drawn faces, and drawn, what I mean, like sunken faces to show they're fasting. And the proportions many times are not the same proportions as what we understand in three-dimensional art. If you've ever looked at a Palm Sunday icon, there's a little tiny little person in the bottom, and you see Christ is on the donkey, and there's a little tiny little person putting out a coat, which is a child, but it's so miniature in the icon that it almost looks unreal. And then you look at the nativity icon of Christ, and there's how many Christs are in that icon? 2. There's 2 Christs in the nativity icon. Can you do that in a statue? No. And you might say, now, where's 2 Christs? Well, there's one that the Virgin Mary is holding. And then if you recall, there's one in the bottom corner. There's another scene of Saint Salome being healed, holding Christ and washing him. And it's a separate scene. And then you have a separate scene over here of Joseph being tempted by the devil. And you have a separate scene over here of the shepherds. And you have a separate scene over here of the wise men. So there's this whole story that comes together in one icon that many times cannot be captured without multiple statues and multiple three-dimensional art. So this gives you a little idea of the background of why we have icons and the need for icons in our prayers and in our focus. And I pray that as we process around the church today and as we proclaim the statement of why we have icons, that it means something new to you, and that the icons that you may have in your home that are stuffed in your drawer, or that you just don't want to put a hole in your wall, or it's too much. People say, what is this, a church? Let them say, yes, this is a church. What greater compliment can you get than someone walking in your house when you say, what do you live in, a church? Thank you very much. Could there be any more beautiful compliment than someone to say that? Because what lives in the church? God lives in the church. So the icons that you brought today, if they're not hanging up, hang them up. If you have icons in your drawers, and this goes for the kids too, if you have a giant poster of I don't know, somebody up on your wall, and there's no room for icons on your wall because you have, Jonathan Taves up there, or you have, I don't know who else. I was going to say Justin Bieber, but he's long gone. People probably rip that down and say, I'm done with that, right? But whatever it is, make room for God in your home and make room for him in your life, especially during this time of Lent. And don't just shove them in a corner. Put them next to you, by your bed, above your bed, on your nightstand. And don't be afraid when someone comes over if they give you this blessed compliment, because Christ, as we see, he goes to the homes in the gospel. He goes to the homes that are open to receive him. And one of the ways that we can receive him and show him that we can receive him is by opening our hearts, by having our icons up, and by worshiping God in all forms, and especially through this iconography that has been saved, has been fought for in the church, and is today will be proclaimed as one of the tools and one of the great resolutions from the Seventh Ecumenical Council. Amen.